Chapter 10 sets up a rescue. They made a mistake in the agreement, and God used it powerfully. The whole thing is, you got yourself into this, I will get you out, signed God. Okay, that's what this is. And so it says, it came about when Adoni-Zedek, Adon is Lord, my, Zedek, righteous. When Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured Ai and had utterly destroyed it, just as he had done to Jericho and its king, as he had done to Ai and its king, and that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made their peace with Israel and were within their land, he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were mighty. Then Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent word to Hoham, king of Hebron, and to Priam, king of Yarmut, and Yaphiah, king of Lachish, and to Debir, king of Eglon, saying, come up to me and help me, and let us attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the sons of Israel. Now what's interesting is that he doesn't go to attack Israel. He goes to attack Gibeon. And within the world, the rest of the world's going to gang up on the one that's sort of made peace. Okay? And what you have in verse 5 is, so 5 kings of the Amorites, king of Jerusalem, king of Hebron, king of Yarmut, and of Lachish, and of Eglon, gathered together, went up with all their armies, encamped by Gibeon, and fought against it. Then the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua at the camp at Gilgal, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites that live in the hill country have assembled against us. So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the valiant warriors. The Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them shall stand before you. Put a box around verse 8, because verse 8 is God's promise. What you see is implied in the text, God and Joshua meet together over the issue. Now you can't tell, it looks like God just tells him this, but this is the formula that's used in Joshua to tell you that Joshua is taking consultation with God. After the Gibeonite problem, he would be very wise to do that. And in verse 8, he gets this encouragement, and that's how God responds. Now, what you're going to see is that God is going to do a couple of things that only God could do to help this all happen. What part does Joshua play in this? March, arm, fight. What part does God play in this? Weather. Things like, sun, moon, stars, storms. So it says that the Lord confounded them before Israel. And he slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and pursued them by the way of the ascent of Beit Horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. That doesn't mean a lot to you, but what it means is God used that. Remember I told you the center part were these 4 villages that they couldn't take? They went down here from the center and actually this way and cleaned up this whole area of the country. There's a backbone, a set of mountains or ridge, and they chased the people all the way down to Azekah and Makkedah. And what he's telling you is, this is the way he controlled, this is the way God did this southern campaign. So the southern campaign started as a response to the Amorite kings. Keep going very quickly. It says, verse 12, Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day that the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the sons of Israel. And he said, O sun, stand still at Gibeon, O moon in the valley of Ayalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation avenged themselves of their enemies. Is this saying that the sun didn't move? Is this saying that the moon didn't move? Keep reading. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? Which is, by the way, a book you don't have, so it doesn't help you. And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. There was no day like that before it or after it when the Lord listened to the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel, and Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp at Gilgal. Now, did you see in verse 11, there's another feature of this? In verse 11 it says, they fled from before Israel while they were on the descent of Beit Horon. The Lord threw large stones from heaven as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more of them who died from the hailstones than those from whom the sons of Israel killed with the sword. It seems to me that when you read this, you should figure out something is wrong with the narrative. The way it's translated, something doesn't make sense. It was a bright sunny day with hailstones. Does that make sense? No. In Hebrew, actually the way the passage reads is the word for sun stood still is the same as saying sun was held back or held in place, and moon held in place. When you read the verse as it's translated in verse 13, so the sun was held in place, the moon was held back until the nation avenged themselves of their enemies. It sounds when you read it in English like what happened was God made the day stay for longer and the moon didn't shine. But a more accurate translation probably reads like this: God brought a freak storm and they didn't see the sun nor the moon for an entire cycle, but a storm that came on the land that caused many of them to have hailstones thrown upon them. You're going to see several different commentators that read this differently. Here's the point. We don't know what happened. We honestly don't know. But what I know is that it is an expression, the sun doesn't stand still. By the way, that's not what's happening. The Bible's not inaccurate when it says sunrise and sunset. That's what we call it. But the sun isn't rising, is it? What's happening?
The Earth's rotating.
The Earth is rotating. So we can't say, Earth rotation, sunspot rise, versus to Earth rotation, sun go away. That would be more accurate, but that's not how we say it. Don't challenge the scientific nature of the biblical text because you don't like the way we phrase it, because we all phrase it this way, even though we know that's not how it is. What he's saying is, God stepped in, and in the weather, God slanted the weather toward them and gave them the ability. And more people died, not of human causes, but of weather-related causes. Now, what you don't know is the territory, and I do. When you're coming down the sides of these cliffs, these are very steep hills. They're ridges with very steep drop-offs. I don't think it's that they had hailstones the size of Frosty the Snowman. I think what's going on is he iced the territory and people were sliding and slipping and falling on very steep cliffs as they were running quickly away from Israel. In other words, Israel's coming toward them, they're running away from them, and they're slip-sliding away everywhere. And people are falling all over the place and laying on the ground. And the Israelites are coming down on them on the ridge and chase them all the way down to Azekah, which is all the way down in the south part of the country, in the Shephelah, near where David will later kill Goliath. So all I'm saying is one way to understand the story might be that the sun stood still in darkness, not in a longer daylight time. Okay?
How many days would that take them to take that track?
How long would it take them to run from Beit Horon to Azekah? I can drive it in 2.5 hours.
Okay.
I don't know what that means for running. I have never run from Beit Horon to Azekah.
Would the weather affect the Israelites too?
Yes, it affected the Israelites, but apparently it went before them. Imagine that the armies march up and they're up on top of a hill. Israel's coming from the desert side. It's hard that's why I need to take you there. It's hard to imagine. The country's split in half. Israel has a mountain range that goes through the middle. This half is brown. It's very dry. This half is green. And the peak of the mountains, see in Jerusalem it sits up on top there. If you're in West Jerusalem, you get 27 inches of rainfall a year. If you're in East Jerusalem, you get 11. There's a lot of difference. You get more than twice the rainfall if you live just half a town away. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine, but the rain has to stop somewhere. So you literally see the rains come up from the Mediterranean, and they stop right at the ridge, and the desert eats the clouds. The clouds come up and they dissipate over the desert. So what's happening is Israel is staying down by the Jordan. So they're in the dry part. The kings all march up onto the ridge, and this part gets a storm that has hailstones. As they are trying to run, Israel's still coming up in the dry. So people are sliding all over the place, falling, breaking their necks, flopping off the sides and Israel hasn't gotten engaged in the battle yet. And as Israel comes upon them, the Israelites are in no urgency. They don't have to run because these guys are falling down in front of them. So there's no urgency about it. They can just walk up and, that's it, you're dead. And seriously, in a battle like this, it's hard for us to understand, but in a biblical battle fought on mountainsides, more people are hurled to their death than sworded to their death. You basically, it becomes a brawl and whoever gets thrown off dies. That's what happens. And you see that happen a lot in biblical battles because they're a lot fought on hillsides. When you're on terraced agriculture, this happens all the time. I know that sounds weird, but nevertheless, let's very quickly then, all I'm saying to you is, it's difficult for us to know whether it was a long sunny day with a freak hailstorm, which could happen, or it's a long dark day in which the people are both on ice, slipping, getting an ice storm, and it's dark and they don't know why. Okay? One of those two is the translation of the passage, and I got to tell you, in Hebrew it's not easy to tell which it is. I can't, honestly, I think it's 6 1 1/2 dozen of another. So if somebody tells that story in a youth group that you're in and it's completely different, don't freak out on it. We can't tell. Go to verse 16. I want you to circle the word Makedah. So they're going to go all the way down to Makedah. You'll see it in verse 16. Circle it again in 17. Circle it again in 21. In 21, they all come back, and the people return to the camp to Joshua at Makedah in peace. No one uttered a word against any of the sons of Israel. And Joshua said, "Open the mouth of the cave and bring out the 5 kings to me from the cave." What they did was they chased these guys all the way to the southland into a cave area, and the kings or the chieftains are in there, and he has them brought out. Now, keep going in verse, where did I leave off? 22. Okay, go to 23. They did so and brought the 5 kings out from the cave, king of Jerusalem, Hebron, Yarmut, Lachish, and Eglon. And when they brought these kings out to Joshua, Joshua called for all the men of Israel and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, "Come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings." So they came near, put the feet on the necks of the kings. Joshua then said to them, "Do not fear or be dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for the Lord will do to all your enemies with whom you will fight." Afterward, Joshua struck them, put them to death, hanged them on 5 trees, and they hung on trees until evening. Same formula. It was kind of the ending flag or ending memorial for the battle. And it came about at sunset that Joshua gave a command. They took them down from the trees, threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves, and put large stones over the mouth of the cave to this very day. That cave, by the way, is not known. We do not know where that cave is. However, somebody could, find that. Remember that the excavations are ongoing. We do know that the 5 cities have the same architecture building from the Canaanite period. That you can go to each of those cities and archaeologically find the same kind of finds in them. Verse 28, Joshua captured Makedah on that day and struck it, and the kings at the very edge of the sword utterly destroyed it. Every person who was in it, he left no survivor. Thus he did to the king of Makedah just as he had done to the king of Jericho. Now the difference is Makedah was a tent camp. So we don't actually know where it is. We don't know where the cave is because we don't know where the city was. And the city just meant lots of people living together in tents. And the king meant chieftain. And so what you end up with is something that's very hard to see. All right, I want you to very quickly do something before we go to lunch. First, mark off in verse 29 through the end of chapter 10 that there is the taking of the south. This portion of the land has been taken already. Okay? I can't do this in a way that you can see. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. He now then takes all of this. In the end of chapter 10, he took everything from the Gibeonite axis. That's the axis of where the Gibeonites that deceived them was. Everything south down to Hebron, which is in the center. If you go to the bottom of the Dead Sea and go halfway across the land, you're at Hebron and the Hebron Plateau, okay? It's actually a little bit north of there, but good enough for a hand-drawn map. In chapter 11, I want you to see in 11, 1 to 14, that they then turn to the north, and the city that they're set on the north is actually up here north of the Sea of Galilee in the center of a valley that comes down. You probably know this, but there's a valley called the Jordan Rift Valley. It is the deepest valley on the earth's surface, deepest crack that you can walk on. It comes all the way from Mount Hermon up here, and it's the Sea of Galilee is there, the Dead Sea is in there, and it goes all the way down to Lake Victoria in Uganda, 2/3 of the way through Africa. It's called the Afro-Syrian Rift. Right in the middle of that rift on a ridge is Hatzor. Hatzor will be an important city, and it's one of the largest excavations in Israel today in terms of a city excavation. It is under excavation now, and they have found in the last couple of years the library of Hatzor, which gives us a whole bunch of Canaanite stuff, which is kind of cool. Did you have a question? No? Okay. All right, so chapter 11, verses 1 through 14, I want you to see that they're taking all of the northern country. Let me just mark off a couple of places for you. Hatzor, or Hazor in verse 1, is that city that I'm talking about that's north of the Sea of Galilee. You might make a note. It's just north of the Sea of Galilee. There is a city that's right on the Sea of Galilee on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee, right on the northern shore, there's a city that is destroyed at the time of Joshua and never rebuilt. And when we're in Israel, you will drive over it, and I will point out it to you a number of times. That city is called Chenerot. Chenerot is in verse 2. The city gets its name from the sea. In Hebrew, the Sea of Galilee is Kinneret. Kinnor is harp, as in a harp that you play. And the Sea of Galilee was shaped like a Hebrew harp. And so Kinneret, if you say to an Israeli, I'm going to go to the Sea of Galilee, they don't know what you're talking about. What they mean is you're going to the Kinneret. Okay, so when you're there, you'll be staying by the Kinnerets, which is the same. This is a city that's named after the sea. Okay? You know that verse 3 has in it the mountain called Hermon. So Hermon, make a note, that's the mountain that divides Syria, Lebanon, and Israel today, Hermon. And it is 9,200 feet above sea level. It's a huge, it's the highest mountain in the Middle East. And that is the mountain from which the Jordan River becomes a river. The streams come from the snows on top of Mount Hermon. By the way, a big portion of the last part of Joshua is the inheritance. And all it is lists of cities. How many of you know they're just lists of cities, mind-numbing lists of cities, right? When you were reading through it, you were probably going, and the seventh lot fell on the tribe of Dan, and they made a border from this city to this city, and then turned at that city and went to the border of this city, which went from around to the right to that city, and then over the trees it went to that city, and then there was a mountain in the middle. So what this is legal documents as to where the lines go. So this is going to be as fascinating as watching people put up a fence. Okay? So we're going to do it quickly, but we're going to do it.
He talks about the book of Jasher. So at this time, they already had some of their books written down then?
Yes. There are a dozen books. If you go back to the first week of class, you'll pull out of the notes in the first week of class a list of books that we don't have, and that's one of them. There are a dozen or so of them. They get mentioned as the record of the kings that we no longer have. We have to remember that what we have is only a piece of the library. We have the piece that God wanted us to have, but there's an awful lot of stuff that was written down that we just don't have. And now we find other pieces of things archaeologically. You know, like I said, there's 151 Psalms in the collection from Dead Sea. We have 150, they have 151. Nobody uses the 151st when it's in a museum because it wasn't found until after the canon of Scripture was closed. So even if we found the book of Jasher, we wouldn't rewrite the Bible with it. We would go, wow, that's interesting. And we would... No. God closed the canon of Scripture with what He maintained and chose. And at that point, there was actually a lot of debate as there were other things that they had. At the time, they had some of those other books. And they made the judgment that they shouldn't be a part of it. And we recognize now that they were lost partly because of that judgment. When it wasn't, if it was in the Bible, we'd still have it. But because they kept copying that, but they didn't copy the things. There's so much of history that's got lost. And the majority of records we don't have. The Romans kept unbelievable records, except for the Huns burned them. So we had them until we didn't. And that's kind of the way that goes.
Okay, the question was, if it's not included, was it God breathed? Would it have been God breathed to the people of the time? Because he does mention it here, the book of Joshua.
No, but it would have been informative to the people at the time.
Okay.
It would have been like me on Sunday morning mentioning something from the AP wire service. It wasn't the breathed word of God, but it was certainly the news. And it's only relevant to the people who lived then, right? So you're going to go, okay, great, I'm glad I had that. In chapter 11, verses 1 to 14, you saw that the northern cities around Hatzor, north of the Sea of Galilee, are all lined up. And it says in verse 14 of chapter 11, all the spoil of these cities and the cattle the sons of Israel took as plunder, but they struck every man with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them. They left no one who breathed. Now look at verse 15. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone that all the Lord had commanded Moses. I think that is Samuel's insertion to sort of summarize what you've been looking at, which is a long history of a series of battles. And there's a little bit of a recap in 11:16 to 23. And look at what it says. Thus Joshua took all the land, the hill country, all the Negev, the land of all that the land of Goshen, the lowland, the Arava, the hill country of Israel and its lowland, from Mount Halak that rises towards Seir, even as Baal Gad, the valley of Lebanon at the foot of Mount Hermon. He's basically describing from the south to the center to the north to this edge, the entire zone. And what he's saying is that Joshua covered that zone. It doesn't mean he kicked out every other ite. There were other ites besides Israelites still there. We're going to see them later. But this is a summary. He's not trying to say he did this, then he did this, then he's just sort of kind of closing it up and saying he took all this land. Joshua waged war, verse 18, a long time with all these kings. There was not a city which made peace with the sons of Israel except for the Hivites living at Gibeon. They took them all in battle. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts to meet Israel in battle in order that he might utterly destroy them, that they might receive no mercy, but that he might destroy them, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Verse 21, then Joshua came at this time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country. Who are the Anakim? Yes, the descendants of the Nephilim. Anak means giant. Anakim is the giants. And you remember that where we had the Nephilim in Genesis 5, they were cut off once, but now they've reappeared. One of the answers for the bitter destruction of the people here was there was significant demonic presence here. And that's one of the things you have to bear in mind with Canaan, that every time they would leave somebody live, they would open the door to allowing the demonic enemies to be a part of what was going on. And so it says in verse 22, there were no Anakim left in the land of the sons of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod some remained. Would you make a note next to that? What are Anakim? What's it meaning? Giants. Who's going to come out of the giant territory? The land of Gaza, Gath, Ashdod, Ekron, that land is called what later on? It's the Philistine cities, the Philistine pentathlon. And coming from the Philistines will be a giant, Goliath, and giant brothers. And what I want you to understand is that's the last place the Anakim are. If the Anakim are in fact offspring of the Nephilim, and if in fact this is all, there's more going on with David and Goliath than just a tiny guy and a big guy. There is the God of Israel staring down someone who's directly involved in a demonic incursion in the race. So there's something much bigger. By the time you get to verse 23, you're supposed to sigh. Here's the sigh. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. Thus the land had rest from war. In my opinion, that's the end of the book. The end of the book is verse 23. You're supposed to go, God initiated a war. Israel maintained a war. The result, rest. You're supposed to walk away from chapter 11 going, after 5 chapters of warfare and killing, I just want it to be over. And you get to the end of the chapter and you go, it's over.